enlightened, naked truth. Moonshine Illumination Entertainment.
Do you ever ask yourselves, where does all these religious concepts come from? Well, the origins to religion runs deep like the roots to trees I can't even pronounce. Every detail I mention may not be factual, but rather confident assertions of logical plausibility that make possibilities more prominently profound, just trying to piece the puzzle together. In a world of delusions and beliefs that are anchored to people's hearts and which drown themselves in certainty, when really they rely on desired notions of irrational mind thoughts, and which everyone has took a swim in life's pool of confusion, and I'm here just to throw in a life jacket. I'm just trying to be the light post from a different direction, a different perspective. I believe we live in a colorful world, while religion tends to paint the picture black and white. Usually the ancients were practices that become a blur of the past, while the surviving beliefs are displayed as truth when they are not. They are embellished fabrications and dominant perspectives that have took control, using emotional convictions as feeling real enough to reinforce faith, when the skeptical realities are practically always there, but the mind's eye becomes blind by the embedded traditional views purported as truth. Like a blind man who senses comfort with a visualization of something that can make a connection as words of influences. Hearing what sounds nice is the foundation faith builds upon. Unfortunately, the truth just sometimes is a harsh reality, and this is where ignorance becomes bliss. Now, let me start by saying the Bible is astral worship. All ancient belief systems were based off of the observation of the stars and planetary movements. The ancients would see vivid pictures in the sky and thought God was communicating through designs, and these stars became anthropomorphized into personifications. Now Jesus is the English name that went through transformations from Hebrew to Arabic to Greek to Latin. The Hebrew Yahshua or Yeshua just means Yahweh saves, or Yahweh is salvation, the way to be saved. Yahweh was the tribal war god of the Israelites. It is known that the Greek names ending with sus or sus or sos, S-O-U-S, were attached by the Greeks to names and geographical areas as means to give honor to their supreme deity Zeus. Source: Dictionary of Christian Lore and Legend. Etymologically, Jesus comes from Hail Zeus, the chief god and head of the Greek pantheon. Most knowledgeable Christians will admit this, but use it as apologetics against the Roman Church of corruption. According to the Encyclopedia of Britannica, the Zeus is a combo of two mythical supreme deities, Eu and Sus, or Sus, and in Gnostic and Greek texts they are seemingly one and the same. There's no legit proof for Jesus' existence. The name was a common one, and like Joshua, was an epithet chanting, just like Muhammad is just the praying of words like to praise or praiseworthy. Jesus is forced into the historical framework. Josephus, a first-century Roman and Jewish scholar and historian who was born in Jerusalem shortly after the alleged death of Jesus, says very little on the so-called Messiah. It's been profoundly demonstrated that the antiquities of the Jews that have two references to Jesus are not authentic and were a later insertion to say declared as a forgery. The Testimonium Flavium is generally agreed upon to be a falsehood. Out of volumes of his work, we should assume there would be more mention of the Christ and a divine man who made such an impact. There was about 20 or so Jesuses in his writings, but also distinct from the biblical narrative, and not one of Nazareth, which isn't even proven to exist until at least after 70 AD. Actually, Paul of Tarsus doesn't even mention a Nazareth or Bethlehem in all of his writings, which would have strengthened his arguments in many areas trying to convert people. Josephus to mention Christ wouldn't fit right anyway, because he wasn't a believer and the style with flow of thought was broken. Insertions usually leave evidence by breaking the flow of the surrounding text, and when removing the insertion, it should restore the original train of thought. Paul's letters are either earlier than the Gospels or out of the trajectory, because he mentions no details of the Gospels and he isn't going by eyewitness events. To say the Gospels are eyewitness accounts is like saying a comic book proves Batman, and even Batman can be somewhat more realistic. But these aren't eyewitness recent events, but rather Paul gets all of his visions and revelations from the Old Testament scriptures. He states it himself in Galatians 1:12. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. So Paul gets nothing from any man, and that would mean no disciples or any physical human teacher, because he wasn't taught. So he even says he wasn't taught. Paul also states in 2 Timothy 2:8, remember that Jesus Christ, of the seed of David, was raised from the dead according to my gospel. Seems Paul is on a power trip in using the knowledge he obtains from Psalms, Proverbs, and Isaiah to further himself as an authority. Also, Paul never even met Jesus, but just in a vision. And why wouldn't he reiterate Jesus' words? It's because he knows nothing of the Gospels and only the Old Testament, preferably the Septuagint, which is the Hebrew Old Testament translated into Greek. And it's possible the Gospel authors could have used some of his writings, as well as it is presumed they used other sources for aid. But the Gospels lack knowledge of Paul too. There's even conflicting issues between the evangelists and him. Prophetic scripture doesn't necessarily mean a prediction of future events, but rather a prophecy was a word from a prophet who relayed a message from God to man. But not all messages are clear. Even Jesus contradicts himself. Don't believe me? Check John 5:31 versus John 8:14. If I testify about myself, my testimony is not valid. And the other one is, even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid. So which one is it? In Ephesians 3:1-5, Paul says he's a prisoner of Christ and that the scriptures showed a mystery that God waited to show. The mystery was that since the beginning of the ages, that God's Son was sacrificed. Even the Old Testament was speaking in past tense of the Messiah to be beaten and whatnot. Romans 16:25-26. Now to him who is able to establish you according to my gospel and the message I proclaim of Christ, secret since the world began, according to the revelation of the mystery kept secret since the world began. As my friend Truth1 said, not a revelation by Jesus, not a revelation from Jesus, but it was of Jesus. Just like we get visions of things, Paul saw lights as if it was the sun's rays beaten down with its glorified shine. Everyone wants to act like they've been touched by God. What if men who claim to be wise since the beginning of time have been pulling our strings? In any case, nothing's new under the sun.